When you begin to throw, one of the important things you need to do is prepare the clay. If you just pull some clay out of a bucket, or even out of a box sometimes, you may end up with air pockets, unevenness in the clay, a little dry spot, a little wet spot. And all of those things, particularly the air pockets, will interrupt your throwing. When you go to throw on the wheel, you're going to run into having air pockets that make your fingers kind of bounce on the side of the pot. You're going to have to deal with them on the wheel, and so it's better to get your clay prepared before you get to the wheel. So I like to show several different ways of wedging the clay. So I'm here at a wedging table. If you don't have a wedging table, you just need sort of a porous surface. If your tile surface is not porous and the clay starts to stick, you can lay down a piece of canvas and wedge on that. Or even a piece of wood if the wood doesn't have splinters coming out of it. So this is clay that's been sitting for a while. I got it out and just kind of pulled it out of the bucket. And the simplest way to prepare this clay, if you're feeling tired, you haven't worked with the clay much before, you're just kind of getting used to it, you can simply slam it down on the table. This is not the most efficient way to prepare the clay, but this is something I tend to use every time I throw or every time I work with clay, just kind of at the beginning, particularly if I'm dealing with clay that I've recycled by hand, if I'm not using a pug mill or a mixer or boxed clay. So I'm just kind of slamming this down. I'm not trying to pancake it down flat because then I'm going to have to peel it up. And when I peel it up, you see all these wrinkles and stuff. I'm really folding that clay together. What I want to do is press any unevenness out of the clay, force those air pockets out, basically pop them, and basically turn this clay into a fairly uniform both shape and consistency. So the slamming it on the table method is a perfectly fine way to begin. If you do this and you notice you're having a lot of air pockets, I'd recommend you practice moving on to one of the other techniques. So the next sort of technique I'm going to show you, you're going to use the palms of your hands here. You're going to push that clay gently away from you and rock back. You're going to push gently away from you and rock back. And this process, I'm doing it kind of slow right here, push gently, rock back. This is a little bit more efficient at getting all of that clay moved around inside, so we don't have just kind of an air pocket hiding in the middle while the edges get worked on. Now again, I don't want to pancake this, because if I pancake this, then I fold it over and now I've trapped a bunch of air bubbles, and now that clay is less wedged than it was a moment ago, less well prepared. So don't do that, but now you see what not to do. I'm going to try to get at a bit of an angle so you can see this from a different perspective. I'm leaning into the clay, rocking back. Leaning into the clay, rocking back. And when you get going fast, I'm going to turn my angle a little bit because this is a little bit more comfortable. When you get going fast, you can't see all of this process. So when you start working with clay yourself and you're looking at other people wedging in the studio and they're zipping along, what they've gotten is the habit of how to do this correctly. You take your time, press into the clay, rock back, press into the clay, rock back. And I always say if you're on the right check, you get kind of frogman happening here, a little face. Don't put the eyes in because those are little air pockets. And if it gets kind of long, put it on its end and do it in the other direction. And you rock forward, rock back, lean forward, rock back. Depending on how soft or dry your clay is, how stiff it is, you may need to use more or less pressure. Sometimes bigger people, taller people, stronger people have a tendency to push, lean their weight into it, and then the clay just flattens. Sometimes that's required if you're not as big or as strong. You will need to lean your weight into there. I just heard an air pocket pop in mine, which is a good sign. You don't usually hear that, but you don't usually pancake it like I did. And I'm going to see if I can get around the other angle so you can see this process. Once you're done working with the clay, once you're done wedging the clay, and how do you know when you're done? Well, you kind of just go for a while. You'll know once you start throwing. If you wedged up a bunch of pieces that day and you've got lots of air pockets, pretty good sign you need to wedge longer next time. One way you can know is you can cut it apart like this, and you can see I actually have an air pocket right here, but of course now I have to put this together and I have to wedge it again. So I don't recommend doing that unless you are having a lot of trouble and you want to check what's going on. One more way to wedge the clay, and that is the way that I tend to work with. Let me get this kind of shaped into a ball. When you start to throw, it's a good idea to throw with a ball of clay. And so if you've wedged the way I was just recommending, and you've got the sort of frog guy here, I would still recommend using either the palm of your hand or the table to kind of shape it into either a cylinder or a sphere. I see people start with a piece like this, start like that on the wheel, and it's all kind of wobbly, uneven, and that means as they get started throwing, their hands are going to wobble over that, and so I don't recommend that. So shape that into a cylinder or a sphere. Now the third way of wedging that I'm going to show you is called spiral wedging or shell wedging, and that is similar to what I just showed. I'm going to lean forward with this palm part of my hand, lean forward, and I'm going to rock back at an angle. Lean forward, rock back. And you notice the difference here. I'm rocking back at an angle just on the one side. Basically, my right hand is pulling it back, both hands lean in. Right hand pulls back, both hands lean in. And that causes it to twist just a bit as I wedge. Unlike with the kind of wedging that I just showed you, this process also helps to get the particles of clay going around in a spiral. And of course, what am I going to do on the wheel but work them around in a spiral? So this particular type of wedging is what I automatically do. I think it's the most useful, most comfortable, but it took me a while to learn how to do this. So if you want to learn spiral wedging, practice. 5 balls of clay, practice the spiral wedging, come back the next day, 5 more balls of clay, practice the spiral wedging. It will become comfortable eventually. One little note that I notice when I'm spiral wedging is I sometimes get kind of a little concave section here, and if you get that, it just depends on how your hand is positioned on that edge. If you get that, you're going to have a little gap of air underneath when you put it on the wheel. So I think it's a good idea to try to press that out so that your bottom is either completely flat or a little bit convex. It's got a curve going that way. That way when you put it down on the wheel head, you've got a nice flat section here. You don't have a little air pocket that gets trapped inside of there. Wedging is important. It's boring, but it's important. You got to do it, and you'll see how much of a difference it makes when you're throwing if you take the time to wedge.